My name is David Ulbrich, and today is September 9th, 2007. What is your full name, sir?
Charles Holly Midgley.
And when and where were you born, sir?
I was born in Gadsden, Alabama, June 29th, 1918.
And which squadron were you in?
I was in the 514th.
When did you join the military?
We had a draft in 1940, and I had a poor draft number.
So you won the lottery you didn't want to win.
I won a lottery that I had a good number. My boss called me in and said, I was working for CIT, the finance people. My boss called me in and said, you're doing a good job, but you've got a poor draft number. See, those numbers, they were published. Everybody knew when you were going to get it. He said, you've got a poor draft number, and I need to tell you that you can't advance with our company because they're going to get you. You're going to be drafted. Well, I had 3 years of college, and I had been told that was enough to get in the aviation cadet program. So I applied for that, and sure enough, you only needed 2 years of college to become an aviation cadet. So I went into the service in May of 1941, about 7 months before Pearl Harbor.
Okay, and I take it you wanted to go aviation so you wouldn't have a choice, right?
I didn't. I knew that if you were drafted, most of the people went in the infantry, and I just didn't have any fond hopes of the infantry at all. So that's when I decided to go into the Army Air Corps.
Yes. And what was your specialty in the Army Air Corps?
I went to flying school, a pilot flying school, and this was in peacetime. We still weren't in war, and it was tough. And I had 47 hours and 50 minutes flying time, and a lot of that solo, and I washed out.
Oh.
And all they said was flying deficiency. So I all of a sudden, here the late summer of 1941, I'm a civilian again. Well, I knew my draft board in Birmingham would be right after me because as soon as you were discharged, or as soon as you washed out, they notified your draft board, so they would be after you in a hurry. Before the draft board could get me, I got a notice that they were forming a bombardier class, and would I be interested in that? Well, I was very interested in that. So my specialty ended up as a bombardier.
Very good, very good. Before we move on into the war years proper, I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about what your childhood was like in the Great Depression.
It was tough. As you can see by the dates, I was born at the end of World War I and grew through the Depression. My father had died in 1924, and my mother remarried about 3 years later, and she married a banker. And my hometown of Gadsden, Alabama, had 3 banks, and his bank was the smaller of the 3. He was an official in the bank, and there was a run on the bank, and it folded. Unfortunately, this was before, there was a bank holiday, and very few of them failed after that. I can't remember the circumstances, but there were some kinds of rules implemented that lessened the number of banks that went under. Anyway, there we were with no income. I was a high school kid by then, and I had hoped to go out for football again. This was going to be my senior year, and I told my mother that I was going to go out for football, and she said, you can't do that. You've got to keep your job. I was working at the picture show. I was making $0.25 an hour, but a quarter was pretty big in the 30s.
It really was. It really was.
Anyway, I did get to go to college. I had distant relatives in California, and we had lived in Nevada for a year after my daddy died. So I went to UCLA my first 2 years, and then went back home where I belonged and went to third year at the University of Alabama. I ran out of money, couldn't get a job. It was just hard. There were hundreds of kids in school that were there because they had a job in Tuscaloosa at the University of Alabama. Well, I couldn't find a job, so I dropped out. That was in '39. I went to work for CIT, and that pretty much brings you up to date. I had a poor draft number. I wasn't going to make any advancement with CIT, and so I ended up in the Army Air Corps.
And what did CIT stand for? Or what kind of a firm was it again?
It was financial. They financed things as small as a refrigerator.
All right.
Automobiles were there. It's still in business, by the way.
All right.
I don't know what they do now, but I'm sure they're still in some end of the financial game.
All right. All right. So then you ended up in bombardier school, going to school to be a bombardier. What was that training like? What was it more book learning or more practice?
No, more practice. Very little book learning. More practice. We had a bomb sight that was mounted on a movable platform. We were about 12 or 15 feet above the floor of the hangar. We were in a hangar, and we literally bombed with the little platform moving forward as we learned how to work the sight.
And how did that sight work? You know, did you aim the bombs with the bomb?
I couldn't tell you that. That was our best secret.
All right. Yes, you're very early on. You had to.
The Norden bomb site was it. We protected it with our very lives.
So you were early enough that you did have to. Did you have to like sign a waiver that you signed some statement that you would protect it with your lives? That's the legend I've heard.
I don't remember signing anything. I remember after I graduated and was commissioned and was assigned to a group, to a team, a crew. I was the only one on the crew that carried a gun. This was in Tucson. You ever heard of Alamogordo, New Mexico?
Yes.
It is absolutely, I'm speaking 1942 era, the worst place on God's green earth. It was just awful.
Probably wasn't green there.
No greenery, no warmery. We didn't stay there but a month or 6 weeks, and then we went on to Topeka, Kansas, which was bitter cold, but a lot better than Alamogordo.
Wow. Can you, as a bombardier, can you, you reached your initial point, and then you really took over flying the plane.
The airplane was turned over to the bombardier, and he directed the plane with his knobs. And the bombing secret, you had crosshairs, and you put them on the target, and you set the knobs so that they stayed with the target. And when it got to the right place, the bombs were released. It was that part of it was, it sounded simple, and they had some pretty stupid slogans in the Army Air Corps. One of them was that we could drop a bomb in a pickle barrel. Well, we really weren't that accurate.
A pretty big pickle barrel.
It had to have been an awful big barrel. A lot of pickles.
A lot of pickles. What was the biggest challenge as a bombardier that you faced? Was it the technology, or was it the patience?
In combat, I think it was the fear. Just the idea that people were shooting at you.
Because you got your head down at the front of the plane, and there's stuff bursting all over the place.
And the plane jumps every now and then because a projectile's gone off under you, near you, and you hear the rattle when the fragments hit the bottom of the plane. But I think the fear was was probably, that was
Biggest challenge.
my biggest challenge.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So you were flying fairly early relative to many of the other members of the
Yes,
reunion here. You would have. When were you doing your missions? Approximately when were you flying your combat missions?
We started let's see, we got there in March, and we started, I believe, the 30th of March.
1942?
This is 43.
43.
43, yeah.
So
No,
were you-
Halpro, the original outfit was, well, they weren't even there. I think they were there in June of 42. That was our first entry into the African theater.
the Halverson Project.
Yeah,
that's what that's-
right. I believe they had initially been scheduled to go to India, and they stopped them, and they ended up in North Africa.
That's kind of a change. India versus North Africa. Anyway, so you were there when you were flying in really let's say early 19 or mid 1943. Mid 1943. What was the biggest danger? Was it fighters or flak or both?
Fighters attacking from the front. See, I never saw a B-24 with a turret on the front of it until I got home from the POW camp. We had the B-24D, which had 3 flexible 50 caliber machine guns in the nose, none of which we could shoot with any accuracy. The Navigator and I were in the nose.
Right, two cheeks, and then one right up front. Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
And you couldn't. There just simply wasn't room enough up there. If the Navigator if we could have gotten rid of him, I could have gotten behind the gun and maybe fired at a plane. But they recognized pretty early that that's where the B-24 was most vulnerable, was from the front. Because, you know, they had the 2 waist guns, they had the tail turret, and the top turret. But see, the top turret could fire about 180 degrees this way, but he couldn't fire much forward because of the 4 propellers. See,
right.
there were stops. If he swung that gun, if he was firing forward, he had 250 calibers. If he was firing forward, and he went very far in either direction, the gun cut off, so he didn't hit the propellers. So they sorely needed protection from the front, which they later got, but I never saw one of them until I got home.
Sure. So how many missions did you fly before you, I assume, got shot down or had to bail out?
We were on our 26th mission. They had, the military tends to lie to its people. They had told us when we flew 30 missions, we could go home. Well, I think we found out pretty early in the game that simply wasn't going to happen. There wasn't any big reason for us to go home to begin with. You know, what are we going to do when we get home? Except maybe train for the Pacific. But anyway, we were on our 26th mission, and this was on July the 16th, 1943. We were bombing Bari, Italy. Thank goodness, an airport, not the city, but an airport. Our intelligence told us that they had information that the Germans were flying planes into this airfield at Bari from Germany, modifying them in some manner, and sending them on to Sicily. By the way, this was the first week of the invasion of Sicily. I believe that invasion was on the 10th or 12th of July, and we were flying on the 16th. Right. And so that was our mission, to destroy the airfield, the runways, and as many airplanes as possible. And it was supposed to be what we used to refer to as a milk run.
Ah, yes, the easy mission.
Easy mission. Well, they got 2, we had 24 airplanes up, and they got 2 of them. And I didn't know it, but I talked to a fellow yesterday who got back on 2 engines from the same mission. He remembered seeing us go down. And they got back. That's a long, that's a long flight for for two engines. But I guess they threw overboard everything. Your orders were to get rid of everything if you lost an engine, and particularly if you lost 2 engines, and if you lost 2 engines on the same side. If you lost one and 2 or 3 and 4, it was.
To be a pilot, you would have just had to.
The co-pilot had to.
The co-pilot had to help.
He had to
keep
help
it level.
a lot of rudder to keep the plane going straight.
Sure, sure. So you were on this mission, and was it flak that got you?
We got hit by fighters going in, and it set one engine on fire. I think the number 3 engine. Well, my pilot's name was Doc Rose. Doc tried to put the fire out with his extinguisher, and I don't think he ever really got it out. But then when we got over the target, we got hit by flak. Well, we had the engine still burning when we came off the target. We did a kind of a dumb thing, I thought. Barry is a coastal city. We bombed from inland, bombed the airfield, and instead of getting out to sea, our orders would have turned back over the land. And you don't question orders. But anyway, that's.
Which subjected you to more potential ground
the
fire.
fighters were waiting for us. See, they wouldn't follow you very far out to sea, because I don't think they had a very good air rescue system like we did.
Well,
And if a pilot, if a German or an Italian pilot got 50 or 60 miles at sea, and then we got him, I think his chances were pretty slim.
the other thing is many of those fighters really simply didn't have the range. They didn't have the loiter capability or anything of that nature also. So
At our altitude, see, I think we were bombing at 24,000 feet. We jumped at, Doc told me later, we jumped at about 19,000. We had gone down that much.
wow.
See, we couldn't keep up. After we left the target, we began to drop behind, and we were smoking. And of course, that was just an invitation.
Sure, sure.
I did find out one thing. We had had a terrible discussion at the base. We argued about everything. I guess maybe that relieves some of the pressure, but we argued about everything. And one of the things we argued about was, what do you do when a guy jumps out of an airplane and is hanging up there? Do you just go on by him, or do you try to shoot him, do you try to kill him? Well, it was pretty well divided. Part of them were just going to leave him hanging there, and the rest of them were going to shoot him. But anyway, I pulled the ripcord entirely too early. I was so high up, I thought I was climbing. I had no feel that I was going down. And of course, the planes just went right on by me, and nobody shot at me. And the same with the other crew members, now my pilot was smart. He made a delayed jump. He must have fallen 15,000, 16,000 feet before he pulled the cord.
Did your whole crew make it out?
No.
No.
We had a squadron intelligence officer who was a captain. He was a Greek named Klidakos. And he was from Tarpon Springs, Florida, which used to be a big sponge diving city. It was on the coast near Tampa. And the Greeks apparently made the best sponge divers. Well, you know what happened to sponges. DuPont came along and invented a sponge that was better than the
Artificial sponge.
artificial sponge. It was better than the natural sponges. But anyway, Captain Kodakos was of a sponge diving family. He was so good at his job, he got himself checked out as a gunner, so he could go along on a few missions. And when the guys told him the flak was heavy, he knew what they were talking about.
Sure.
Or if they told him it was a milk run and nobody shot at him, he knew what they were talking about.
Sure.
Well, Klodakis had taken the place of one of our gunners that had been injured on a previous mission. And he was manning a waist gun, and the fellow said that he got hit by a 50 millimeter cannon shell, and said he never knew what hit him. So he went down in the plane. We were in the city jail in Barry, where we stayed through the Ploesta mission. The famous Ploesta mission came 14 days later. I was lucky, I didn't have to go on that. I was already in jail.
Lucky. That's the
some luck, huh?
yeah.
Anyway, the Italian guards came to us, and they were really interested in us in the city jail in Barry. They never had any Allied prisoners, and they were nice to us. They fed us from an officer's mess somewhere near the jail, and the food was great.
I'm sure.
And completely inadequate. The best spaghetti I've ever eaten, and not nearly enough of it. Anyway,
Okay.
They came to us and said, "Did you have a black man flying on your crew?" And we said, "Oh no, they don't fly with us." He said, "Well, we found a man in the plane, and he was real dark, but he said we gave him a good Catholic funeral." And we figured he was probably Greek Orthodox, and I think Catholics and Greek Orthodox are pretty close.
Sure.
So we thanked him. We told him we thought that was, but Klodakis he was a Greek, and he was darker than the rest of it.
Sure.
Had a dark complexion. But we spent something over 2 weeks in the Barry City jail. They really didn't know what to do with us. And finally, they sent us to an interrogation camp. They told us that the building had formerly been a monastery, and the foundation itself was over 300 years old. The building much younger than that. But I don't know where it was, and I never will. But of course, we were trained to tell them name, rank, and serial number. They knew a lot about us. They knew where we came from, and which wasn't too hard to figure out because there were only the two groups in the desert, the 376 and the 98th. And they knew that we flew 24, so it wasn't hard for them to figure out that we came from the Benghazi area. But we stayed there something less than 2 weeks, and then they sent us to a prison camp in a little town of Chieti.
Any idea how to spell that?
Have you? Cheiti.
All right.
Chieti.
Chieti. And which nation was that?
This is in Italy.
In Italy.
Yeah,
All right. So
in
you
Italy,
remained in Italy.
Yeah.
Did the Germans run that, or did the
No,
Italians?
it was Italian.
It was Italian.
It
All
was
right.
a nice looking place inside. It had been built for political prisoners, for people that didn't exactly agree with Mussolini.
That he didn't kill, right?
They didn't kill. He just put them in this. It was not bad looking at all. It didn't compare with the Stalag Luft 3, where I spent most of my time in Germany.
All right.
So we stayed in Chieti until the fall. I can't remember the date, but we got up one morning and there were no guards on the walls. And then we found out that Italy had capitulated. We had a newsman in there named Larry Allen. You ever heard of Larry Allen?
No.
He was a writer, and I can't remember where they got him, but he shouldn't have been in there to begin with. And he was just pacing the floor like a caged tiger. He said, "If I can get out of this place and get to Rome, I can win the Pulitzer Prize." Well, he had a perfect entree to get out of the place because there wasn't anybody guarding us. The guards had left. We were trying to decide what to do. I believe there were 225 Americans in the camp, and the camp had every nation that was fighting the Axis. The highest ranking officer was a British colonel, And he called us all together, and he said, fellas, I don't have any control over you. You can do anything you want to because the guards are gone and nobody's guarding us. We're free. He said, my advice is to stay here until they come and get us. He said, every Italian in the countryside has got a shotgun. He said, they're scared to death. They don't know what's going on. They'll think you're invading them and they're going to shoot you. He said, my advice and what I'm going to do is stay right here until they come and get us. Some people took off anyway. My buddies, we stayed there. I can't remember how long. I know we got awful hungry because there was nobody to prepare the fruit. We had plenty of fruits and vegetables, but you couldn't eat most of the vegetables raw. They had to be cooked, and we didn't have any way. There wasn't anything anyway for us to cook them. And we were sitting there waiting for them to come, for our saviors to arrive, and a ragtag bunch of Rommel's boys who had been driven out of Africa showed up at the camp. And they were elated when they found this whole bunch of prisoners. They rounded up an engine and 15, 18, 21 boxcars, and off we went to the Third Reich. So instead of being free, we were prisoners again. And of course, we ended up first in Austria, and then later in Silesia, which is about in the center of Germany, in Stalag Luft 3. Tell you a funny story about when the Rommel's boys were rounding us up to make this nice train trip. A sergeant that spoke pretty good English came by, and he said, I want you to get in groups of 36. Says, these boxcars are 40 and 8. But says, we're only going to put 36 of you in them. You ever seen a European boxcar? They're little tiny. You can put 2 of them in one of ours. They're little tiny things. And they called them 40 and 8 because they were supposed to hold 40 humans or 8 horses. Anyway, we got in groups of 36, and they let us. He said, you can take anything you want to with you. Well, fellas had lawn chairs and small pieces of furniture, all the clothes they owned, and all kinds. And nobody seemed to care as long as you could get it on the boxcar. Anyway, this guy comes back and he says, "Who is the senior officer here?" Well, a friend from my hometown had been shot down 3 weeks before me, Jack Bentley. Jack was a West Point man. He was a pilot flying a B-17 outfit out of, I guess they were in Algeria. They were in extreme northwest Africa. We looked around, and I was the first lieutenant. Most of them were second lieutenants. And here's Jack was a captain. He says, I guess I am. He says, come with me. So Jack goes with the guard, and they go around behind the railroad station, and everybody starts grumbling. Damn, wouldn't you know it? Here we are in the worst mess you can be in, and rank still has its privileges. That's an old
I understand.
RHIP, rank has its privileges. The guard comes back maybe half an hour later, and he says, come with me. So we all around the corner, and here's a boxcar with the door wide open and white smoke billowing out of it. Well, we get closer to it, and here's Captain Bentley in there with a broom made out of sticks. And this guard has got Captain Bentley sweeping out the boxcar for us. So the guard didn't like officers very much, so he picked a senior officer to clean out the car. We think it was, I'm pretty sure it was flour. The boxcar had been used to haul a load of flour, and one of the bags must have broken. But anyway, we went to Germany in a train load of boxcars.
And which stalags were you in Germany?
We went, this was Stalag Luft 3. They didn't, in Germany, they didn't even bother to interrogate us. They took our pictures and gave us numbers. My number was, I can't think of it, 2758, but I used to know the German words for it. 2758. 2758. They took a picture and which later went on our records, and we all got our records. The Germans, very methodical people. And when we moved out of Stalag Luft 3, they took all our records with them. So when we got down to 7A, where we were finally liberated, everybody went in and got their own records with the picture on it. And as far as I know, everybody still has theirs.
You said that the German prisoner of war camps were much worse than your experience in in Italy. Could you describe the conditions, maybe the shelter, the washroom facilities, the food, the weather? Can you speak to some of those conditions?
We were in the center camp of Stalag Luft 3. It had five compounds: north, south, east, west, and center. And altogether there were about 10,000 officers in the camp, somewhere between 9,000 and 10,000 officers, we were told.
Was it only for, it was only for officers though?
Yes, the Germans were very particular about that. There was not an enlisted man in that camp. They wouldn't permit it.
All right.
If an enlisted man got in there by mistake, they shipped him out.
Well, they were efficient.
That's just the way they were.
All right, go on.
I don't. The enlisted men really had some advantages over the officers. The Germans made them work and wouldn't let us work. Well, those working parties they had pretty good contact with the civilian population. And they bought eggs, chickens, cigarettes were priceless. American cigarettes, absolutely priceless. Because the people that, a lot of people, everybody smoked then, it seems like, and the cigarettes that those people could get were terrible. And of course, American cigarettes, they were good.
Yeah.
So these fellows had cigarettes. They got them in there.
Kentucky or North Carolina tobacco.
Right. We got Red Cross parcels, and as you would expect, the best one of all was the United States Red Cross parcels. They came from Britain. They came from the Argentine. They came from Brazil. They came from South Africa. But the best ones were, of course, the American parcels. And each parcel had 5 packs of cigarettes in it. That was a half a carton. And the 2 brands I remember was Old Gold and Lucky Strike. I think Lucky Strike may still be in existence. I haven't smoked in 30 years, but I think they're probably still in existence. But the enlisted men had that advantage over us that they had to work. They did all kinds of work, but it was outside their camps, and I guess the guards were pretty lenient with them, and because they probably gave them a smoke or two.
From what I understand, part of that came from Hermann Goering being an aviator himself during World War I. So, he treated the officers as he thought officers should be treated, so you wouldn't work. And then all your flight crew would be sergeants. Even if they were 20 years old, there'd still be a sergeant because, he also treated sergeants well. If they were anything less than a sergeant, they would have been treated worse.
That is correct. Yeah.
So you have the 5 compounds. Tell me about the shelter, your washrooms. What about the facilities?
Our bill, I think the center camp was probably, I believe it was the original of the 5 compounds, and it was bad. The buildings were wooden, one story. The windows didn't fit real good, and we depended mostly on body heat. We had pretty good clothes. We had pretty good uniforms, I was shot down in the summer in Italy, and I was not properly clothed, especially for a harsh German winter. But we had clothes. We had a commissary, and also my next door neighbor at home had asked my mother to let her have one of the, I can't remember what they call, I can't remember exactly what they call them, but it was a permit of some kind to send us a package.
All right.
And she said, I want to send him some warm clothes if you'll give me one of his coupons. So she sent me an officer's uniform. I was awfully well dressed for Stalag Luft 3 when I finally got him. Back to the conditions, the buildings were in the center camp. I think some of them were better in the younger camps, but in the center camp, the buildings didn't fit together good. The windows didn't close good, and they had shutters on them. We closed those at night, and that helped a little bit. We didn't have enough fuel. We cooked for ourselves. They furnished us hot water, and once in a while some soup, which was, you can imagine, it was soup made out of barley. It wasn't very good.
No.
But at the outset, we had the Red Cross parcels, and that's what we lived on. And then, of course, they finally played out completely from our own troops. You know, we had such air supremacy at the tail end of the war that I think those fighters were sent out every morning to just run up and down the highways and shoot anything you can find to shoot at, because the trucks came out of Switzerland, and although they had canvas covers on they weren't big 18-wheelers like we know. You know, they're much smaller trucks, but they had big red crosses painted on the sides and the top. But they finally quit running. But the camp was one of the hardest things about it was that the soil was sandy. See, there was always tunnel digging going on.
Oh, of course.
And it was clever the way the British are smarter than we are about things like tunnels. And they were the ones that, of course, that pulled off the Great Escape. There was no American involved in the Great Escape. There were no Americans in that compound.
So Steve McQueen and I'm trying to think of the other fellow.
Well, the tunnels were called Tom, Dick, and Harry.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and of course they found one of them.
Right.
But that was the idea in digging 3 of them. They felt that the Germans would possibly find one of them, and then they'd say, well, that's it.
Sure.
Surely they don't have any more tunnels.
Sure.
but they did.
So you're talking about the sandy soil and the British cleverly digging in it.
We all had to give up a bedboard every now and then. Seems to me when we got there, seemed like we had 8 bedboards.
The cross slats that would hold your mattress up.
We didn't have any springs.
No.
The mattress was made out of straw.
Right.
And filled with bed bugs.
Oh, I'm sure.
But every now and then we had to give up a bedboard because they used that to reinforce the tunnels. We had a tunnel going on in our barracks, and it was clever. I guess we learned that from the British. We had a little cook stove, and when they were going to dig on the tunnel, they wouldn't make a fire for cooking the evening meal. That's the only hot meal we had, and we prepared that ourselves. They had an arrangement where they took the stack off, the stack that ventilated, took out the smoke, picked the whole thing up and moved it over, and that was the entrance to the tunnel. And they went down so many feet and then headed out. And the bedboards that we had to give up were for support down there so that it didn't cave in on them. I never was asked to work on a tunnel and never did. That one they discovered. I think a guard came in the barracks unexpectedly, and they didn't get the stove. But my recollection is hazy on this, but I believe they didn't get the stove back in place in time, and that's the way they found it. But it hadn't gotten anywhere. But the barracks, the living quarters were terrible. The Germans, we were told that the Germans had decided they wouldn't build any more prison camps. They just do with what they had.
Keep filling them more and more.
Of course, the prisoners just pouring in there. So the bunks had been double deckers. So to increase the capacity, they triple deckered the bunks. They came in and put a third bunk up there. And that was a great place to sleep because it was warmish. It was warm at the, up in heat rises. It was warm in the ceiling.
Still not very warm.
Still not very warm.
Right.
Most people slept in their clothes.
Sure. What was the weather like there? So you were in Germany, and
it was bitter cold. And of course, me spending almost all of my life in the deep South, I never experienced a winter like that.
And what was this, the winter of 43 to 44? Or 44 to 45?
44 to 45.
44 to 45, all right.
Yeah, I was there 2 winters. The first winter wasn't as bad.
So then you must have spent pretty close to 20 months?
No, almost 2 years.
Almost 24 months.
I was shot down on the 16th of July, 43.
All right.
And the ship I came home on landed in New York on June the 6th, 45.
Oh.
So I was the better part of 2 years.
Right. How did you pass the time and keep your sanity?
We had a library, and the International YMCA was in charge of recreation, and they brought in ice skates, hockey sticks, pucks, all except all that protective armor that a hockey player wears. They didn't have any of that. Well, I didn't have any interest I had an interest in watching them, but none in getting. I didn't want to get involved. I had played roller skate hockey in the street as a kid with a broomstick and a tin can, but as far as ice hockey, I'd never even seen a game. But when they got all this hockey equipment, all the boys that wanted to play hockey got together, and they humped up the snow. They padded it good and tight in I guess a rectangle about the size of a hockey rink, maybe a little bit bigger, I'm not sure. The Germans let them flood that. And I'll tell you about the static water supply, our swimming pool, in a minute. But the Germans let them put water in there. And they would run a bunch of water in and then leave it overnight. And the next morning they had ice. And they had a hose and they ran more water in there. And the next morning they had thicker ice. So pretty soon they could skate. The static water supply was what the Germans advertised to the world as our swimming pool. It was for fire protection. They didn't have any fire plugs, like we know them in the camp, none at all. But they had a fire truck and they had a lot of hose, and they had built this. It looked like a small swimming pool, and they filled it with water. And the idea was that if a fire broke out in one of the barracks, drop a hose in the static water supply, pump it to the barracks, and hope they got the fire out before they drained the pool. But they showed that in their propaganda as the prisoner of war swimming pool. Of course, you couldn't go in it; it was filthy.
I'm sure.
And they didn't chlorine. They didn't do anything to it. It just sat there.
Sure. What about your own personal activities? Let's say reading or whatever. What got you through? Was it thinking about home? Was it guts? Was it religious faith? or a combination of those things? Your friends, your comrades?
Most everybody was optimistic. For one thing, they had a secret radio. I never did know where it was, and I didn't want to know.
No, I guess not.
I had no desire to know where it was. But just before they locked the barracks at night, a guy would come around who had a fellow that had entree to the secret radio, and he would give us a briefing from the BBC. Then he would tell us what the German radio had said about the different battles, what was going on each front. And, you know, they say in war, the first casualty is truth. People brag about their victories and lie about their defeats. The Germans they just could not tell their people how badly things were going. Although the people probably, most of them probably knew, just from relatives in the service and hearsay. But that's how we got our information. And things looked so good all the time I was in there. We looked like we were winning, and it was just a matter of staying alive, and then you'd get home.
Sure.
I never got depressed. A lot of people did. I want to tell you about Tabor.
All right.
There was a guy in the center compound named Tabor, and he was from California. I don't remember where. And he was kind of nutty. We could take a bath 5 days. We could take a shower 5 days a week. There wasn't any reason not to be clean. The body, you had dirty clothes, but the body could be clean. The only catch was you had to have 24 people in the bath party. And they formed up down at the main gate at some, maybe 9 o'clock in the morning, I don't remember. And as long as there were 24 of them, they took you out into the Vorlager, and there was a shower. And everybody got buck naked and showered together. And the sprinklers were up above your head, and it was fine. The water was hot, and it was a good shower. You could stay clean. Well, one morning, Tabor showed up in the bath party, and the 24 guys are standing there waiting to the guy to come get them and unlock the gate and take them out. And old Tabor takes out a kitchen match, and he strikes it, and he holds it up, and he says, "Follow the lights to freedom." And he starts out the gate. Well, the guard's got a gun there, and he's going to shoot him. And one of the fellows in the party spoke German, and he stopped him. He says, "Loco, he's crazy. Don't shoot him." And they grabbed him and pulled old Tabor back in there. Well, of course, it went all through the camp. Crazy like Tabor.
Crazy like Tabor. That's
So,
outstanding.
the end of the story is the Germans interviewed him. I guess their psychologist or psychiatrist interviewed him, and they decided he was nutty as a fruitcake, and they sent him home. They repatriated him. We found out a month or two later that Tabor's making speeches all over California about the POW circumstance. So that was the saying around camp, crazy like Tabor.
Very good. That is an outstanding story.
A funny story, wasn't it?
Oh yes. Well, we're coming down to the last few minutes here, and I have 2 more questions for you. One, I want to skip ahead to, what did you say, June of 1945. Can you give me in a few words what it was like coming back to the States, getting home and being free? Or is there any way to do that?
No feeling like it. We came home on the troop ship, the William S. Gordon, and luckily I was the first lieutenant, so I got a cabin with, I think there were 6 of us. It was probably a cabin for 2 ship's officers. I believe there were 6 of us in there.
Oh, you're used to close.
It was just like this, but much better than most people fared.
Yeah.
We got into New York Harbor, and it just looked beautiful. They took us over to Fort Dix, New Jersey, and we were interrogated and given some clothes, and then they had a place where we could get money. I got in the money line, and when I got up to this young lady. She said, Lieutenant, how much money would you like? I said, I want $500. Well, this is 1945. That's an awful lot of money. I think it'd be like 2,000 now, maybe.
All right.
She said, Lieutenant, that's an awful lot of money. I said, yes, ma'am, and that's what I want. So she gave me $500. We had a, see, I was the first lieutenant on flying pay, and I've been overseas well over 2 years. I had a lot of money.
Oh, yeah,
I had a lot of money coming.
definitely.
In fact, I was hanging wallpaper in my home when the check arrived.
Wow.
And my mother wouldn't even let me over the stepladder. We were pretty sure that's what the mailman had, because he was whistling as he came up the sidewalk.
Sure.
And we were upstairs, and we could see him coming up the sidewalk, and he was waving an envelope like this. And my mother said, "You stay right there. I'll get it."
All right, and I guess the last question is a question I ask all veterans, whether they're, Army, Navy, Marine Corps, or Air Force, and this is something that I ask everyone of the World War II generation. Do you consider yourself to be a hero?
No.
Why not?
A hero does something above and beyond the call of duty. We were doing what we were trained to do and what we were paid to do. And a first lieutenant on flying pay in those days made good money. No, I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything exceptional. I forgot to tell you
All right.
that the plane we took overseas was the Lady Be Good.
Oh, really?
They had a rotten deal that they did when you got to your base. We joined the group in Saluk, which is a little ratty desert town about 40 to 50 miles below Benghazi. And as soon as we got there, they said, "Have you had any high altitude formation flying?" And we said, "No, we haven't." They said, "Well, we got to have that airplane." We found out right off the bat that they didn't need crews; they needed airplanes. So we ended up with an old green. We had a pink. The Lady Be Good was pink. She was a beauty. We ended up with an old green airplane that was worn out. Wouldn't even get to altitude.
Wow.
Our first mission, we ended up on the island of Malta and stayed there 2 or 3 days while they brought us an engine.
Wow. Wow.
Anyway, a hero.
Well, your answer is very common, and I think it shows the humility of your generation. And one of the reasons why I asked that hero question is today in 2007, the word hero is thrown around and it's almost meaningless. It's almost meaningless. So I just want to make sure that whoever is listening, watching you and listening to your words, whether it's your family or research or the American public or a student or something, understands what you think being a hero is and isn't. Because again, in 2007, when we're doing this interview, it's just thrown around.
Yeah.
So,
I didn't do anything exceptional. The best thing I did was stay alive.
well, that's awfully good.
So here I am.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.